We were basically, I think, a soap for the under fives. The difference, we didn't have cliffhangers, we didn't have tags or hooks. Each programme had to end and be resolved within the 10 minutes. But where we were a soap was we had this group of characters all living under the same roof, colliding, interacting, falling out, all the things that happen in adult soaps, and we were doing it for the under fives. I was a writer on a soap, Coronation Street, and I then left that soap and did single plays, and I worked on series, but I wanted a home. Writers live in little holes and they're desperate to have a place to go other than their little room, and I was looking for a family, and Pipkins turned out to be my next family. My agent sent some children's stories to Michael Jeans, who had been asked at that point to set up a new programme for under fives, and he liked the stories, which no publisher ever did, but Michael did. And so I met him, and Pipkins really was just kind of a gleam in his eye at that point. But we got on, I liked and felt comfortable with the way he was actually approaching it, which is, it wasn't just to be a programme that taught children about concepts or, whether wood grew on trees or whatever. He wanted a much more holistic kind of thing, which was character-led, with which the children could identify, and which encompassed a whole range of emotion, so that we could have sadness, and we could have anger, and we could have conflict, and that was all drama, which was my world anyway. It's the world I came from. I can't remember that we ever really came in and said, this is the topic we are going to talk about. The topics then arose out of the story, and the story arose out of character, which is one way a soap can go, and is probably the best way soaps go. When soaps start to be dictated by story, so that the characters are forced out of character to fulfill the demands of story rather than the other way around, that's when a soap starts to get into trouble. We had a narrator who spoke very simply and very clearly and signposted the story so children could follow him. If we introduced a long word, the advisor would say, children love long words, they sound nice, you can play around with them, they may not know the meaning, but if you're careful to follow that or precede it with a small sentence that actually puts it in context, that says very simply what you've just said, it doesn't matter that they don't fully understand the long word, but the long word's fun. And that's the kind of advisor we had, which was nice and suited us. We had, in some ways, a presenter, because the character who's Johnny, or later Tom, or Peter, sometimes they acted as a presenter in the sense, as in play school, they talked in a sympathetic way to the camera, to the child, and they explained. But they also had a function within the little soap opera and the drama, because they were also the person who kept it all together. In Johnny's case, probably the older brother. In Tom or Peter's case, maybe perhaps the young parent. So nothing could go too wrong, because they would always be there. They would bring everything together. Nobody would ever suffer too much, because they would help to sort it out. So we had the advantages of the straightforward educational programme, like Play Away or Rainbow or Hickory House, and we had character. We had stories that came out of character. We began with the programme with a puppet maker and a grandfather. George Woodbridge was the actor who played Mr. Pipkin initially. And he was a very kind of sympathetic, slightly bumbly and forgetful old man. Very endearing, but of huge presence. Very much the grandfather. After he died and we had to reassess the direction the programme went in, that's when Pipkin stopped being puppet makers, Mr. Pipkin, Inigo Pipkin, and became Pipkins the Help People. Michael Jeans knows most about the death of George Woodbridge and how he handled it, because the editorial decision to deal with it in a straightforward, simple way As You Would a Death in the Family was one that was made by him. And I had to write the episode, so of course I was involved in that decision. It was one I very, very much agreed with, because this is where we had this huge advantage of being able to dramatise, of being able to talk directly and dramatise. And it was part of our whole ethos, which was not to sugar the pill, to treat small children seriously, really, to give them respect, to expect them to follow and understand emotional troughs and ups and downs. A grandmother who had been quite shocked initially to see her child watching this programme that was talking about the death of somebody who the child had seen there on the screen a few weeks before, but actually in the end said, well, I think that was quite a brave thing to do, but it did work. And that was when, as it were, the baton passed to Johnny, the apprentice, the older brother, if you like, who then had the responsibility of keeping everything together. Although Johnny did have, at that point, a very bossy elder sister whose name was Bertha, who would occasionally breeze in with a broom, with a great deal of presence, and upset everything and then breeze out again. Johnny was possibly more responsible than his elder sister Bertha, and that's how we began. Mrs. Muddle was a character who I named, and I must have named her after myself. As far as I can remember, or there is no evidence to suggest she was ever in a muddle. I think I probably named her Mrs. Muddle just because of one line where somebody could say, "You are in a muddle, Mrs. Muddle." She was the next door neighbour. She seemed to be calm and fairly competent, and she probably brought a sort of welcome female sanity into the household. We weren't actually all that strong on our female characters, and so she came in and she was warm and sympathetic. The question of sentimentality in Pipkins does not arise. Humour was so kind of built in. I don't think the very format of the programme allowed for sentimentality, because we were always laughing at everything. And I don't think that meant that we didn't deal with subjects. But it was done with a very light touch. That was the essence of the programme. If the programme called The Toy Makers, where we visited a hospital, the point is the person visiting the hospital, talking to the children, was Wayne, who played the character of Johnny. And he related to the children, and the children related to him. When we went out filming, one of the most heartwarming occasions I remember was I went out on a filming run, and the children would come up to Johnny, and they just loved him. They related to him, they loved him. So when he went onto a hospital ward, that actor went onto a ward, they talked to him as Johnny. Pathos was there, and I would always say, you make them laugh, you make them cry. I mean, there was pathos, and there was often pathos with Hartley, because he aspired to so much and achieved so little, and his collapse, the way he deflated, his disappointment was tangible. So my heart went out to Hartley, but his heart never went out to anybody. So if there was a very sad moment, it would be undermined, or Pig would undermine it, or Tortoise would undermine it. So I don't think we ever fell into that trap. What was nice if you had a very opinionated Pig, because Hartley's opinionated. But Hartley's excitable and Pig is phlegmatic. Pig takes his time, Hartley gets into a panic and he gets into a state and he rushes around and he goes over the top and he's histrionic, but both are very self-centred and both are very strong characters. So they collide, and that gives you drama, it gives you interest, it gives you comedy, it gives you fun. Tortoise obviously is very measured and very slow, and very, very pragmatic, and very much in the real world, where Hartley lives in his own world, which bears no relation to any kind of reality whatsoever. Then if you have an ostrich, who's a female diva, who's also absurd, just as absurd as Hartley, and just as self-centred as Hartley, again, you've got an interesting situation. Topov is different. Michael Jeans always knew that we needed one character who in a way represented the child and the under 5. One character who would ask why and what, and that you could explain things to. And then explaining to Topov, in a language Topov you could understand, you were also explaining to the viewing child. in a nice, simple way. But the other thing is that if Topov got into a situation where he was anxious or upset or worried, the viewing child could really identify with Topov. Hartley was a different character because he was much more complex than any of the others. And that meant that we could also appeal. It wasn't the intention, but we just did appeal to older children who were either at home because they were poorly or because they didn't like school or for whatever reason, or even the fish porter from Billingsgate who knocked off and sat down in front of the television. When they watched Hartley, they watched an aspect of themselves. What the grown-ups were picking up were the triggers for Hartley being angry, or they were picking up the vanity, they were picking up all his foibles, they were picking up his eccentricity of mind, his mind cast, because grown-up people aren't meant to have these odd, bizarre thoughts, so we all kind of our own thought police. As we grow older, there are things we can't think or we can't say, so we don't think them, or we know we don't voice them, basically, we think them. Hartley could say them, Hartley could think them, he could say the most weird things. His mind would just go off on a great lateral thinking train with no relation to anybody around him. A grown-up watching that would recognise something that I think perhaps we all do, but we don't like necessarily to say we do, because if we do, people are going to think we're a bit odd, or a bit inconsiderate, or a bit rude. And Hartley was rude, in the way some people are, but a lot of people want to be, older people want to be. The decision to finish Pipkins and to move on to another programme, which actually became Let's Pretend, was one I know very, very little about. Michael Jeans was party to this because it was a decision made by the company. All I can say, it was a period of great mourning and great sadness and great disappointment. My personal feeling was that that programme could have gone on and been developed and gone in different directions, and I just felt that it was very sad that it was ending, but the decision as to why and how was not one that writers are party to. If we all were reunited in a room together, I mean, the years would just sort of fall away and we would fall about, and we would sit down and immediately be able probably to create something, because I think we did have a rapport, and I'm quite certain, however decrepit we all are, it would still be there, I think.